Picture this, a quiet highway stretching endlessly into the night. The cold wind nips at your skin as you stand on the roadside, your thumb raised in silent hope. You're tired, stranded, and willing to trust a complete stranger to get you to safety. But what if that ride becomes the last mistake you ever make? Hitchhiking, that age-old dance between desperation and opportunity, can turn sinister in a heartbeat. Tonight, we journey into the heart of such darkness, exploring 4 true stories where the open road becomes a path to terror. Our first tale takes place in the late 1990s, on a lonely stretch of road in Oregon. Emily, a college student traveling home for the holidays, found herself stranded after her car broke down. With no cell phone and no cars in sight, her only option was to hitch a ride. The sun was already beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the asphalt, as a rusty pickup truck finally rumbled to a stop. A man, his face obscured by a worn baseball cap, gestured for her to get in. Emily, desperate, ignored the prickle of unease crawling up her spine and climbed into the truck. As the truck rattled back to life, Emily tried to make conversation, thanking the man for stopping. But her attempts were met with silence, a silence so complete it seemed to hum in the air between them. Miles turned into miles, the only sound the whine of the engine and the man's heavy breathing. Emily's unease grew, solidifying into a cold knot of fear in her stomach. She noticed the man kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his eyes dark and unreadable. The truck veered off the main highway, onto a smaller, unfamiliar road that snaked deeper into the dense Oregon forest. Emily's heart pounded against her ribs, her mind racing with terrifying possibilities. Suddenly the truck lurched to a stop, throwing Emily forward. They were parked in a clearing, miles from civilization, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to press in on them. The man turned to her, a slow, chilling smile spreading across his face. Just as the man reached for her, a blinding light filled the truck's cabin. A car horn blared, the sound deafening in the stillness of the forest. Emily seized her chance, throwing open the truck door and scrambling out. She didn't stop running until she reached the safety of the car behind them. In 2015, Michael, a trucker driving through the Midwest, decided to help a hitchhiker standing in the rain. It was a night like many others, the endless ribbon of highway illuminated by his headlights. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the world beyond into an impressionistic canvas of grays and blacks. That's when he saw him, a lone figure huddled under the flickering sodium glow of a streetlight. The man was soaked, his clothes plastered to his thin frame, water streaming from the brim of his worn fedora. He carried nothing but a small, tattered duffel bag, clutched tightly in his white-knuckled grip. Michael, a man who knew the sting of loneliness and the bite of a cold night, didn't hesitate. He pulled over, offering the stranger a warm haven from the storm. Grateful for the ride, the man climbed into the passenger seat, offering little more than a quiet, "Thank you." He introduced himself as Robert, his voice a low rumble that seemed to disappear into the cab's soft hum. Michael, a man accustomed to filling the silence of the road with chatter, found himself oddly subdued. Robert's silence wasn't hostile, nor was it unfriendly. It was, however, unnervingly profound, as if he carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories within him. As they drove, Michael tried to engage Robert in conversation, asking him about his destination, his life, anything to break the oppressive silence. But Robert's answers were short, cryptic, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked darkness beyond the windshield. When they reached the deserted crossroads where Robert had asked to be dropped off, Michael felt a surge of relief, mixed with a peculiar sense of disquiet. As Robert climbed out of the truck, he turned to Michael, a faint, almost apologetic smile touching his lips. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the wind. And with that, he turned and walked into the storm, disappearing into the rain-swept night as quickly as he had entered Michael's life. Chapter 3. The Woman in White. On a stormy night in 1983, a man named Victor picked up a woman standing on the side of the road, dressed in a flowing white gown. Rain lashed against his windshield, blurring the world beyond the reach of his headlights. The wind howled like a banshee, whipping the trees into a frenzy. Victor, driving home after a long shift at the local diner, strained his eyes against the downpour. That's when he saw her, a ghostly figure seemingly materializing from the gloom. She stood at the edge of the road, a solitary figure in a swirling vortex of rain and wind. Her long white gown soaked through clung to her slender frame, billowing out behind her like a spectral flame. Her face, framed by long dark hair plastered to her cheeks, was pale, her eyes wide and luminous, reflecting the headlights with an eerie intensity. Victor, a man of simple faith and a kind heart, felt a pang of sympathy for the woman. He couldn't, in good conscience, leave her stranded on such a night. He pulled over, his headlights illuminating her more fully. She seemed young, almost fragile, her delicate features etched with a mixture of fear and relief. As she approached the car, Victor noticed she wore no shoes, her small feet bare against the wet asphalt. He rolled down the window, the wind instantly whipping strands of her dark hair across his face. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the storm's fury. She offered a weak smile, a glimmer of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I need to get to the next town." Victor hesitated for a moment. Something about the woman, her ethereal beauty and the strange, unsettling stillness of her demeanor, set off alarm bells in his mind. But the storm raged on, and the woman looked as though she might be swept away by the wind. He couldn't, in good conscience, leave her to the mercy of the elements. "Get in," he said, unlocking the passenger door. "It's not safe out here." Chapter 4. The Friendly Stranger. Our final story begins innocently enough. Jake, a young traveler exploring rural Texas, hitched a ride with a man named Walter. The sun beat down on the dusty highway, the air thick with the scent of pine and baking asphalt. Jake, his backpack slung over his shoulder, had been walking for hours, his throat parched, his feet sore. He'd been on the road for weeks, embracing the freedom of the open highway, relying on the kindness of strangers to get him from one place to the next. A beat-up Ford pickup truck slowed to a stop beside him. Behind the wheel sat a man with a weathered face and kind eyes, his smile as warm as the Texas sun. He introduced himself as Walter, a rancher heading towards a town about 100 miles up the road. "Hop in, son," Walter boomed, his voice a gravelly baritone. "No sense you walking in this heat. Ain't nothing out here but dust devils and tumbleweeds." Jake gratefully accepted the ride, throwing his backpack in the back and settling into the worn leather seat. Walter, a man of few words but easygoing charm, offered Jake a cold bottle of water and a stick of beef jerky. As they drove, Walter shared stories of his life on the ranch, his words painting vivid pictures of cattle drives, rodeos, and the rugged beauty of the Texas landscape. Jake, captivated by Walter's tales and disarmed by his friendly demeanor, let his guard down, lulled into a false sense of security. As the miles ticked by, however, Jake noticed a subtle shift in Walter's demeanor. His once jovial tone took on a sharper edge. His eyes, though still friendly, seemed to hold a glint of something calculating. He began asking Jake increasingly personal questions about his family, his travels, his reasons for being on the road. Jake, though starting to feel uneasy, chalked it up to Walter's rural curiosity. Then, Walter veered off the main highway onto a narrow dirt road that cut through a dense thicket of trees. "Shortcut," Walter explained, noticing Jake's questioning glance. "Save us a good hour's drive." But as they drove deeper into the woods, the trees pressing in on either side of the road like silent sentinels, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The sunlight, filtered through the dense canopy, cast the road in an eerie, almost sinister glow. The air grew heavy, the silence broken only by the crunch of tires on gravel, and the distant, unsettling caw of a crow. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs, his instincts screaming at him to get out, to run. He fumbled for his phone, but the battery icon blinked red, dead. Hitchhiking is a gamble, a dance with fate where the stakes are dangerously high. While these stories are chilling reminders of what can go wrong, They also highlight the thin line between kindness and danger on the open road. It's a reminder that trust, like a journey, should be undertaken with caution, for not every smiling face harbors good intentions, and not every open road leads to a safe haven.